Hi, everybody. Bob Schwartz here, and I am interviewing the one and only Dr. Fred Gallo, who has written umpteen books on energy psychology, coined the term on energy psychology, past president of ASEP. Is there anything you haven't done, Fred? Oh, EDXTM. And so you're going to be doing an invited presentation on,
Right.
I love the title, Who Are You Really? And focusing on consciousness and identity.
Yes.
So perhaps you could tell the folks a little bit about this idea of identity. I think it's really it's constructed, and or whatever you'd like to say, actually.
Okay. Let me just, I don't want to give away the whole talk, but
Yeah.
a few things about it. I mean, we have, I think how we function in life is through identities. We have all kinds of positive identities. I am, I function as a psychologist, a psychotherapist. That's not who I am, but that's a kind of a role, an identity that I step into. And whenever I'm doing that, whenever I'm in my office, I don't have to think about it. It just sort of flows, right? Because it's like I become that at that time. And that particular identity is not very welcome at home in my relationship with my wife, by the way. Okay. I can't be a psychotherapist.
Right. Oh, no, that doesn't go well.
No, does not work. And I think every therapist knows that.
Unless your wife's a therapist or your husband's a therapist, then maybe. But if they're not, like,
yeah. It's not really the way to go.
not good, not good.
And
One helpful handy hint for everybody: don't take that identity home to your spouse.
Right, absolutely. But it's not ultimately who you are, but it is, and it isn't about being phony, but it's it's something you've learned and you step into, and that I consider a very positive identity to an extent, as long as you can separate it. As soon as you become that identity across the board, then you've kind of lost yourself. Okay.
I think partly what you're saying is that this thing that we're giving the verbal label identity is really a series of all kinds of things, rules of the mind that automatically quickly say, here's your world of how you're going to behave and how you're going to think and how you're going to feel. And it's on autopilot.
Right. It's automatic. And like we have all kinds of identities. Like you have a car driver identity. As soon as you get into the car and you start driving, you don't have to think about it. It's automatic. And you can, listen to the radio and you can be thinking about this or that while you're driving. It's a different kind of an identity. There's a muscle memory to it. There's a lot of different aspects, neurologic aspects, belief aspects, whatever, are involved in this sort of thing.
Well, that's on the positive side.
Yeah, this is on the positive side. But then there's this thing that happens where we develop these negative identities. And I call them like they're negative, they're controlling identities. Okay, so they kind of take you over. And you could think of them as, in a way, kind of like ego states. If somebody has a trauma, then they can develop, well, let's don't call them traumas. The trauma would be a kind of an upset. Okay, so a person has an upset, and whenever you're in an upset state, your mood lowers. Okay, and because you go into survival mode and
right,
and you're not really thinking very well with your prefrontal cortex and all that kind of neurologic stuff going on. And what happens? Here's what tends to happen, from what I can see, is you're in an upset, your mood lowers, and then it's like, and then you make a kind of a decision. You make a decision at that time, or a conclusion. Very often the conclusion is something like, I'm helpless, or I'm not good enough, or I'm stupid, or I'm unlovable, or the world sucks, or some such thing as that. Okay, if you say the world sucks, it's kind of like, I am the kind of person who thinks the world sucks. So it's always a kind of an I am.
So that's the thing, right? When anybody says, I am, I'm this kind of person. That
Right.
That's an identity statement.
Right, that's an identity statement. And then but really, I think what we are, well, we're many things. Like you can think of a kind of a concentric circles, and on the outside you have like the public eye, and it's what maybe your acquaintances and so on know you, right? And then you go in a little closer, and there's the personal eye. And it's the eye that you have with the people closest to you that know you. And then you have the private eye, and it's that kind of thing that there's things you know about yourself, and I know about myself, that we really don't let other people in on. Okay, matter of fact, some of those things we might even be a bit embarrassed about, or we, whatever, but we keep them very private. And then there's the kind of under eye, or the kind of like the under eye, but it's the eye that not even you know. And we're very good at deceiving ourselves, and so we've hidden that from ourselves too. But sometimes we get glimpses of that sort of thing. But I think when you get down to the basic, what we are is like, and you can almost look at it as sort of like the statement from the Bible where God says, whenever Moses asks, he sees the bush and he says, "Who are you?" He goes, I am that I am. Okay. And so we are kind of like mini I ams. And it's before form. There's a philosopher, Martin Heidegger, a German philosopher, and I studied a lot of his work years ago when I was, in philosophy. And he had a statement that I think kind of reveals it. He said, "A human being is neither a thing nor a process, but the space through which the absolute can manifest." And it's like we are an opening. It's the potential for creating form. And so we're before these identities, but we create these identities as a way to go through the world. And the controlling negative identities, what happens, I think it's this sort of thing. We wouldn't consciously, intentionally want to create something that hurts us, that interferes with our overall survival and our functioning. So our mood has to be really lowered in order to do that sort of thing. It's just like when you do something like you get in an upset state and you say something or do something that later on you regret. At that point in time, you're not really functioning from a state of common sense.
Right.
And so if a kind of a prime directive, in a sense, that we have as human beings, is for survival and for our health. When we get into these lower states, we make a decision that doesn't work in that way, that it actually interferes with our functioning. And so we make a statement like, who would want to decide that they're not good enough, or I'm bad, I'm stupid, or something. There's this thing that we're all familiar with, where we get into an upset state and we say or do something that later on we think, oh my God, that was hyperbole. That was beyond the pale. I wish I hadn't said that.
Right.
There was an element of truth, but it's not really the whole truth, right? When we get into lower moods or in this upset, we can make decisions like that. And then it gets, if it's a severe enough upset, we will imprint it. So there's, and what I'm going to say is,
So there's an imprint.
It's an imprint. It's an imprint.
It's an imprint.
Right.
And so
an interject. It's an interject, right?
An interject. And so that's what, just to, I guess, lead me. So when the talk that you're going to talk about is going to be a process. That's what the identity process is about, kind of releasing that.
Yeah. It's about looking at those kinds of things that create that aspect of personality that works against us, and how do you disassemble that? And in a kind of as a short explanation of it, you do something very much akin to mindfulness, because you let me go back a bit. There was the philosopher, mystic Krishnamurti. Krishnamurti. Do you know that name, Krishnamurti?
I don't actually, but
Yeah, but Krishnamurti, I remember years ago looking at some of his work, but Krishnamurti had an interesting statement. We talked about if whenever you're having a trauma, if you could just accept it and pass through, you wouldn't get stuck.
right.
Okay? There would be no interjection.
Peter Levine before Peter Levine.
Way before Peter Levine. Right.
But
Okay.
same basic idea, right?
Yeah, same basic idea. So the thing is, once you've got it stuck, how you get it unstuck is by being that mindful about it in a certain way. And then you can pass through and you can start to disassemble it. Okay.
And that's what you're going to be talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah, a little bit. I'm going to talk about that. I'll give us some idea. I only have an hour to talk, so I'm going to talk about.
Fast.
I'm going to talk about identities. I'm going to give people some experiences and how that's done. The good, healthy identities and the negative identities, and some elements of what what accounts for our psychological experience. Like there's like 3 principles that account for it. And I'm going to touch on that, and I'm going to touch on how to apply some energy psychology principles and some mindfulness principles to help to alleviate that stuckness.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. It occurs to me, and you probably do this too, but I just want to, this might be helpful for the folks watching, listening. The one I like, one good thing to do while, between now and the conference, I kind of like what Bill O'Hanlon, I know you know Bill, says. Bill says, he says, I used to do shy, but I don't do it anymore.
That's cool.
And so, that for people to realize that one practice, kind of a mindfulness practice, is to don't use the word I am this kind of person. You practice it. You may do it automatically, but so you got to own it. And I think that's sort of what you're saying. But to realize that you do it, and you can choose to do it, you can choose not to do it. But every time somebody says I am, they're almost like hypnotizing themselves, going, "This is who you are. This is the only way that you can be." You'll say, "Well, I'm this kind of person." It's a little like what really Gary Craig talks about, right? The writings on your walls. I mean, it's another way of saying a similar thing, that these verbal statements and everything associated with it, control us. Sometimes for good. I'm a happy person, but
sure.
But sometimes it doesn't work. It's very limiting.
There's positive interjection and interjects that work against our survival.
Technically speaking, I do happy. I do it a lot. I like it. I do it. I make a point. In some things you have some control over what you choose to do. If you can step back and go, that's sort of in partly what you're talking about, I think.
Yeah, if you can step back from it, which in mindfulness parlance, they use the term decentering.
Right.
So when you're caught up in something, you're associated to it. Right. And whenever you can see it for what it is and you step back, one of the little stories that I remember that stands out this with me, there was a guy by the name of Sydney Banks. And Sydney Banks was originally from, he was living in Vancouver area, but he was originally from Scotland. And Sydney Banks was, he said he was one of the most insecure people. He said, I am so insecure. And he went through life as this really insecure guy, right? And one day he was having a conversation with some other guy. And I hear different versions of this story, but I saw a video of him talking about it. He's no longer alive. But he said he was having this conversation, and finally this guy says the next day to him, he says, Sid, I was listening to thinking about what we were talking about. And, when you were talking about how insecure you were, he says, Sid, he says, what a crock. He says, you're not insecure. You just think you are. Well, as soon as Sydney Banks heard that, okay, he goes, you mean I just think I'm insecure? And it's weird because it impacted him in a way that maybe wouldn't impact most people, but he had an epiphany. And at that point in time, he saw that how he was going through life was just thinking that he was insecure, and that he bought into that. Okay. And whenever he could see that, he stepped out of that, and it was no longer this ongoing going through life as insecure, right? And it's not just a kind of pretending as if anymore. It's like you really get it. You really get it. You realize it. It becomes very real for you. And that kind of a change, that's the kind of change we look for in a lot of our therapies, right? Anytime we're working with people that have a personality disorder, or even normal personality disorders, you know, that we all have in some way, you know, and being able to have that kind of an epiphany. And I think that's the structure of a very good therapy.
We don't want someone to just be a little less anxious in any given moment, although that's not bad. We would like them to kind of discover that they can go through life with lower anxiety and more confidence, or something like that.
Yeah, they can be able to, well, if it's not permanently cured, at least you're able to get it again and again and return to health.
Right.
I think that's a good definition of health. It is, you know, if we think too much, the person has to be totally cured. I think a lot of times it's like life is managed, it isn't cured. And if you start thinking it's got to be perfect, well, then you're stuck again. Okay? Yeah. And, you know, I think even with a lot of the tapping therapies, people, they tap and, well, the person isn't cured. Well, that's no good then. What are you talking about? It helped them get a relief there.
Right.
Do it again. And,
right.
But anyway, that's sort of the gist of what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to take people through exercises in the presentation and talk about the structure of identity and consciousness and thought and mind. And I think we'll have a lot of fun.
It is the theme of the part of the conference is the evolution of consciousness and healing. So you're right in the sweet spot there, Fred. Hey, this has been great. Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you in a very short period of time, and everybody else. There's still time to get to the conference, and we'd love to have you. We have over, I think, up to almost 450 people. We expect to be well over 500 by the time you show up. Sure. So thanks very much, folks. Have a great day.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. Take care.